Today's novel is I Do Not Bid Farewell, the latest novel by Han Kang, who won the 2024 Nobel Prize in Literature. This novel, which won the 2023 Medicis Prize for Foreign Literature, is a famous novel that depicts the pain of Korea's Jeju Uprising. The Jeju Uprising was a tragic event in South Korea where government forces, in an effort to eliminate communist-aligned anti-government resistance forces hiding in the mountains, suppressed an uprising, leading to the mass killing of civilians between 1948 and 1954. I Do Not Bid Farewell by Han Kang. Let's draw it now. Kyung-ha woke up from the same nightmare again. It was a dream where snow fell over thousands of black logs that looked like people while the tide rolled in. She wanted to make a short film capturing the scenes of her nightmare, so she proposed the idea to her friend In-sun. In-sun readily agreed, but due to various circumstances, many years passed without it coming together. In-sun was a freelance photographer whom Kyung-ha had met at her job after graduating from college. She had once gained attention for her short films, but 8 years ago, she moved to Jeju Island to take care of her aging mother, who had dementia. Even after her mother passed away, In-sun continued living on Jeju Island, making a living through her woodworking shop. In late December, Kyung-ha received a text from In-sun. It was a message asking her to come to a hospital. It was the hospital known for its expertise in replantation surgery. In-sun had an accident while working on her woodworking project and had severed her index and middle fingers. She asked Kyung-ha to go to her house on Jeju Island. The accident had happened the morning before yesterday, and no one had been to her house since. In-sun mentioned that her pet parrot, Ama, could survive until today but would surely die tomorrow if left unattended. She added that the other parrot, Ami, had died a few months ago, and now only Ama was left. Kyung-ha was startled by In-sun's sudden request. However, seeing In-sun's firm tone, someone who normally never made such unreasonable requests, she decided to board a plane and head to Jeju Island. A fierce snowstorm was raging in Jeju. Kyung-ha recalled her previous visit to In-sun's mountain home and took a bus in that direction. Along the way, Kyung-ha remembered In-sun's stories. In-sun had run away from home when she was a student because she hated. She had come to Seoul but ended up in a hospital after an accident. At the time, In-sun's mother had said she knew about her daughter's accident, even though she hadn't heard any news. She had known because she dreamed of a snowflake landing on In-sun's face but not melting. In-sun shared the story her mother had told her about the winter of 1948. It was the story of how her 12-year-old mother survived the massacre because she and her 17-year-old sister were sent on an errand to their uncle's house. The two girls had to search for their family members among the bodies of their village's people who had been executed in the elementary school yard. As the snow fell, they wiped the snowflakes from the faces of the bodies to identify them. It was only then that In-sun understood why her mother had only one sister left. Kyung-ha got off the bus and walked through the snow-covered road toward In-sun's house. It was pitch dark, and she slipped on the ice road and lost her cell phone. She finally made it to In-sun's house. There, she found Ama, the parrot, already dead. Kyung-ha buried Ama, and soon after, the power went out due to the heavy snowstorm. She pulled out clothes from In-sun's drawer, put them on, and lay down on the mattress. Kyung-ha fell asleep, feeling a fever rising in her body, as if she were coming down with an illness. When Kyung-ha woke up, it was late afternoon. Fortunately, her body had fully recovered. However, Ama, the parrot that had died in the cage, was alive again. And in the workshop, she encountered Insan, who was supposed to be in the hospital. Kyung-ha, unsure whether this was a dream or a hallucination, spoke with Insan. Insan talked as if Kyung-ha had simply come to visit after a long time, and their conversation flowed naturally. She asked Kyung-ha what the title of the film they had planned to make was. Kyung-ha answered, "I do not bid farewell." As evening approached, Insan lit a candle. She then showed Kyung-ha a newspaper article about the remains found under the Jeju airport runway. From there, she began to tell the story of her parents. That year, her father was 19 years old. He had one younger brother and 3 younger sisters. He loved his youngest sister, Eun-young, the most, who had been born at the beginning of that year. At the time, communist-aligned anti-government resistance forces were hiding around Hala Mountain on Jeju Island, and the military was trying to capture them. Her father was the only male in the family who might be suspected of collaborating with the resistance, so her grandfather, fearing her father would be targeted, had him hide in a cave. One night, in November that year, her father was still in the cave. He came out in the evening and was walking home. Suddenly, the sound of a whistle echoed, and the area was flooded with light. Instinctively, he hid. He watched as soldiers threatened and took away children, women carrying babies, and the elderly. After the people were gone, he found his father, who had been shot in the village. He carried his father's body back home and buried him. Her father, who had been hiding in the cave, was captured by the police a week later and taken to Mokpo Harbor. The people the military took were held at the elementary school for a month, and next month, everyone except for the immediate families of military and police personnel was executed on the beach, even babies. Their bodies were then discarded into the sea. The purpose was to exterminate all communists. Her father was taken to prison, and after serving 15 years, he returned. He went to the beach and asked a witness from that time if she had heard the cry of a newborn that day. He also asked if any babies had been washed ashore, but he never got the answer he wanted. Insan said her father suffered from the after effects of torture and passed away from a heart attack. She then told Kyung-ha that the house she lived in had belonged to her mother's maternal family, and shared her mother's story. Her mother and aunt couldn't find their brother or the youngest among the bodies at the elementary school. They thought the uncle must have escaped, as he was a swift man, but it was strange that the youngest was missing. The youngest wasn't at the schoolyard, but at the site of a burned-down house. He had been shot in the stomach and chin, and was unconscious. Due to the curfew, they couldn't take him to a hospital, nor could they call a doctor, so her mother could only bite her finger and drip blood into the baby's mouth. The following year, they received news of their uncle after leaflets were dropped, promising no punishment. However, contrary to that promise, people were arrested. Their uncle was taken to Mokpo. He was sent to Daegu prison, and in 1950, he sent a letter. He wrote that, fortunately, he only had 6 years left on his sentence, whereas many people from Jeju were sentenced to 15 or 17 years, so he considered himself lucky. But soon after, the Korean War broke out, and all contact with their uncle was lost. After the war ended, her mother and aunt visit Daegu prison. They were told that their uncle had been transferred to another city, but there was no record of him. In-sun showed Kyung-ha a photograph of the cobalt mine in Gyeongsan. She explained that in 1950, when the Korean War broke out, members of the Bodo League were imprisoned in Daegu prison from the summer of that year. As the prison ran out of space to hold people, the authorities began selecting prisoners to be executed. The military, after the tunnel of the Gyeongsan cobalt mine were filled with bodies, moved the executions to a nearby valley, continuing to shoot and bury the victims. In-sun said that her uncle was probably among those executed at the mine. In-sun showed Kyung-ha various documents, papers her mother had collected until her death. These documents detailed the massacre, its exposure, the execution of the Breed Family Association leader under the military dictatorship, the reinvestigation, and the recovery of the remains. However, In-sun said her mother had failed. In 2009, the recovery of the remains was halted, and they never found her uncle's bones. Kyung-ha then asked about In-sun's father. In-sun explained that her father had been transferred from Mokpo to Daegu prison, where he received a long sentence of 15 years. But prisoners with longer sentences were later moved to Busan, which is why, by a stroke of luck, he survived. After serving his 15-year sentence, he returned to Jeju and met with her mother. Her mother had heard that a man who had been in Daegu prison had returned, so she went to ask him about her brother. Her father told her that while he hadn't gone to school with her brother, he knew what he looked like, but there was nothing more he could say. In-sun then talked about the time she returned to Jeju. Though it had been hard to care for her mother due to her dementia, as she looked through her mother's papers, she began to understand the pain her mother must have felt. She could feel the weight of the children killed in the name of getting rid of communists, and she realized she could work on the project with Kyung-ha. After finishing her story, In-sun said she would take a short nap. The candle, which had burned down completely, was flickering out. Darkness began to envelop In-sun. Kyung-ha struck a match to light the candle again, and after several attempts, a flame finally rose from the match. I Do Not Bid Farewell is a novel that portrays the painful modern history of ideological conflict in Korea after liberation, covering events such as the Jeju Uprising, the Bodo League massacre, and the Gyeongsan Cobalt Mine massacre. Personally, after reading the novel and researching each of these events, I was deeply shocked. Thank you for watching this video. I'll come back with other maps.